Okay, this is the carbon and molecular diversity of life. This one's going to have a little bit to do with some functional groups and some things about isomers. And so let's get into it. Let's find some differences. First of all, it says living organisms consist mostly of carbon-based compounds. Yes, remember carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And carbon is very highly involved in life. For all of the biomolecules. Carbon's involved in all the biomolecules. Proteins, DNA, carbohydrates, and other molecules that distinguish living matter are all composed of carbon compounds. Organic molecules contain carbon. That's what organic means. It contains carbon. Inorganic, well, I should say inorganic chemistry is a study of compounds that contain carbon. Okay, so when we talk about organic molecules and organic chemistry, you're talking about carbon compounds in both. The overall percentages of the major elements of life, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus, are quite uniform from one organism to another because they're involved in making the four different biomolecules, which are carbohydrates, that's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, lipids, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. You have proteins, which are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and sulfur, maybe a little nitrogen maybe. And then DNA, which is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So they're all involved in your biomolecules. Because of the carbon's ability to form four bonds, these building blocks can be used to make an inexhaustible variety of organic molecules. Forming four bonds, yes, they can make linear, can make branched, can make circular, like ring shapes, ball shapes. So it's a very good molecule. Has a lot of uses. Number of bonds possible, we talked about that in the chemistry chapter. Let's just read through a little bit. The number of unpaired electrons in the valence shell of an electron is generally equal to its valence, the number of covalent bonds it can form. So you see that hydrogen has one electron in its outer shell. They can form one more bond to fill that shell. Oxygen, there are 6 electrons in the outer shell, it needs 2 more, so it can form 2 bonds. Nitrogen, it has 5 in its outer shell, so it can form 3 bonds to get 3 more electrons. And there's your carbon, it has 4 electrons in its outer shell, so it can form 4 bonds. Now, one thing right below these different elements in their ring structures that shows their shells, you see I have something written down. This is the Lewis dot representation. The Lewis dot representation shows the valence electrons. How many electrons are in the outer shell? That's your valence shell. And you put a dot for each electron. And it goes clockwise usually as you're counting around from the top. So hydrogen just has 1 on the side. Oxygen, see it has 6 electrons in its outer shell. 2, 4, 5, 6. That's 6. Nitrogen, it has 5 in its outer shell. There's 5 electrons in the outer shell. You can tell it can form 3 more, these 3 more electrons. And carbon, it shows the valence shell. It has 4 electrons, and there's 4 electrons equally dispersed around that symbol. So that tells you how many bonds they can form. Hydrogen can form 1. Carbon can form 2 to fill the outer shell. Nitrogen can form 3 to fill the outer shell, and carbon can form 4 bonds to fill the outer valence shell. The variety I was telling you about for carbon, you know, being able to form 4 bonds, it can form linear structures, like the A is showing length, ethane and propane, those are gases. B is showing branches that can occur. From butane, you have 2-methylpropane, but it shows branching. That's what you're looking for there. C, double bonds. So you have double bonds between carbons. They still form 4 bonds, that double bonds 2, then 3, 4. So, and then the presence of rings. They can form ring structures. And here is a cyclohexane. It means it has 6 carbons there. And here's another one called benzene. It has some double bonds between the carbons there. So carbon is quite diverse. It can form a lot of different patterns, a lot of different structures. Now we have organic versus inorganic. Organic compounds are compounds which contain carbon. Like glucose is one. All your biomolecules contain carbon. Your carbohydrates, your lipids, your proteins, and your nucleic acids, DNA and RNA. Inorganic compounds are compounds which do not contain carbon, like HCl, hydrogen chloride, NaOH, sodium hydroxide. Those do not have carbon. Structural ways of writing the formula. This is the structural formula. We saw that on a previous chapter in chemistry. We saw molecular formula and structural formula. The molecular formula is showing how the molecule is laid out on a piece of paper, although you know that it does have a three-dimensional shape that is not shown on the paper, but it's just showing how you could lay it out on the paper. On this type of a drawing, when you have an R, the R stands for the rest of the molecule that you're not really concerned with. You're only concerned with the part that you're looking at, and the R represents the rest of the molecule. But on this one, you can see that carbon forms 4 bonds, and each hydrogen can form 1 bond. I put this on here. It says hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons, like the name says, are made of hydrogen and carbon, organic molecules consisting of only carbon and hydrogen. Hydrocarbons can undergo reactions that release a large amount of energy. Well, yeah, look at these that are gases. Methane, that's natural gas. Ethane is a gas. Propane used for cooking, and butane cooking. Pentane and hexane are liquids. But you can see you've probably heard of those, and those are used for supplying energy when you burn them. But those are made only of hydrogen and carbon. You can see it's a chain of carbons with the maximum amount of hydrogens on those. Now, functional groups are the components of organic molecules, so these are extensions off of the organic molecule, that are mostly involved with chemical reactions. The number and arrangement of functional groups gives the molecule its unique properties. So these are going to give molecules their properties. And I have 7 functional groups that we're going to look at here. The most important in the chemistry of life we are following. So these are the ones that are going to be on the biomolecules, these types of functional groups and their arrangements. Hydroxyl, which we'll look at all these, amino, carboxyl. There are 2 carbonyls, aldehyde and ketones, a methyl, a phosphate, and a sulfhydryl. So let's look at those. First one's a hydroxyl. Hydroxyls are OH. So it's a class of compounds, alcohols. And here's an OH on there. This is ethanol, an alcohol. This is the drinking alcohol one. Has an OH on there. So it has 2 carbons and a hydroxyl group. Down here at the bottom, I put another drawing of a hydroxyl, an OH. So it has one oxygen and 1 hydrogen there. The red's the oxygen, the white's the hydrogen. It says group of properties, alcohol, and there's your examples. Ethanol, and there it shows where the OH is on that molecule. So that's the first functional group, hydroxyl group, class of compounds, alcohol. The next one is called the amino group, or the amine, class of compounds, amines. Now, on this one, you see an amine group on the end here. NH2 is the amine group, the amino group here. Now, down here at the bottom, you see NH2. The N is the blue, and the 2 hydrogens hanging off of it. Compounds, amine. Example here. This one I have right here is an amino acid, and we'll see an amino acid again later, but the amine group is on one end, NH2, which is shaded, and we're going to look at the other side, C double bond OOH. That's going to be a carboxyl group. That's for acid. That's why they call these molecules amino acids, because they have 2 functional groups. One's an amine, one's a carboxylic acid group. So amino acids are the building blocks for proteins. Here's the carboxyl group here. See, it's a C double bond O, OH. So carbon still has 4 bonds. Carbon to carbon, that's 1. 2 for oxygens, double bond, 2 pairs, and 1 to the other oxygen. So there are 4 bonds around that carbon. But C double bond OOH is a carboxylic acid group. It's a carboxyl group. And you can see at the bottom here, it says chemical group, carboxyl. The dark molecule there is carbon, and the 2 reds are the oxygens, and there's a white one for hydrogen. It says group properties, carboxylic acid or organic acid. And here's one right here, an example. This is acetic acid. It has a methyl group on the left, but here's your carboxyl group there, acid. So it's part of the name of the word, acid. So C double bond O, OH is a carboxyl group, carboxylic acid. Now here's a carbonyl. Remember, we have 2 carbonyls. This is one of them. This one's called an aldehyde. Aldehyde, C double bond O, H. Just a little different. Carboxyl was C double bond O, OH. The aldehyde is C double bond O, H. If you look at the little drawing down here in this chemical group, you see there's a carbon, and it's double bonded to an oxygen, and you have a little white circle down there. There's your hydrogen. Group of properties, aldehyde. You've heard of this before. This in a word. You've heard of formaldehyde. It has this aldehyde group. It's a preservative. You can also see that here it is on propanol. C double bond O, H. There's that functional group. We have another carbonyl on the next slide. This one is a ketone. See, carbonyl, class of compound ketone. Now, ketone is a carbon that's in between 2 other carbons, and it's double bonded to an oxygen. So it's that carbon that's double bonded to an oxygen, and that carbon is actually between 2 other carbons. And you see how it's drawn here, carbon double bonded to an oxygen. It's a pretty cool little molecule. It has a 3-dimensional shape. It's pretty neat. Properties, group properties, ketone. This is like a fingernail polish removal, or take fingernail polish off your fingernails. You use a ketone. They call it acetone. And here it is right here. Here's what it looks like, acetone, and there it is. Carbon double bonded between 2 other carbon double bonded to an oxygen, and that carbon is in between 2 other carbons. So those are ketones. A methyl group. I actually have 2 on this molecule. I only have one of them colored. CH3 on the right. Well, there's a CH3 on the left also. CH3 on the left also. And let's look at that. You see down at the bottom, there's your CH3. Carbon's dark, and you have 3 oxygens. It says group properties, methylated compound, so it has a methyl group, CH3. And here is one right here on this molecule here. You're not going to remember the 5-methyl cytosine or anything like that. It's just showing how a methyl group is on that molecule. So methyl is a CH3. Have a phosphate, class of compounds, phosphates. We have like adenosine triphosphate, the high energy molecule the cells use. It has 3 phosphates, 3 PO4s, basically is what it has on there. Down here, the chemical group, there's a phosphate, the little like yellow phosphorus, and then you have 4 oxygens around it. Oftentimes, like I said, it's a PO4. For some reason, they don't include the 2 hydrogens in the equation there. Tend to be lost, I guess. Properties, organic phosphate. And here's an example here. Glycerol phosphate. There's a phosphate hanging off the end of it. So ATP has 3 phosphates in a row. Has triphosphate, 3 PO4s in a row. And when the bonds are broken off the 3rd one and the 2nd, a lot of energy is released. Between the 2nd and the 1st, a lot of energy is released by those bonds. But those are phosphates, PO4. And your picture, it does have 2 H's on there though. Here's a sulfhydryl group. Class of compounds are thiols. And you see that it has a sulfur and a hydrogen. And then the rest of the molecule is not really important on this, example. So here's your sulfhydryl group, a sulfur and a hydrogen. Class group property is thiol. Example, cysteine. And there's your thiol group right there, sulfhydryl group right there. Cysteine happens to be one of the amino acids. There's your NH2 at the bottom, and there's your C double bond OOH at the top. It's an amino acid, and the side chain over here has a thiol on it. That's a cysteine. So isomers, compounds with the same molecular formula but different structures and properties. We saw one of those before, which we'll see on the next slide. Same molecular formula, but different structures and properties. So here it is here. The one on the left, this blue, is ethyl alcohol, C2H6O. You see its arrangement. 2 carbons, 6 hydrogens, 1 oxygen. And you see the molecular shape. I just put it up here so you could kind of compare them, of its shape. You look at the dimethyl ether, which is also C2H6O, and you see its structural formula up here is different than the one for ethanol, because this one, remember, it's also flammable like ethanol, but it's toxic and it's explosive. And you see how it's arranged in space. It's different. Its arrangement is different in space. That makes the molecule have different chemical and physical properties. The molecular formula is the same, but the structural is different, and the different structural arrangement gives it different properties. So these are structural isomers. Same chemical formula, or same molecular formula, but different arrangement of atoms, different structure. We have geometric isomers. Now geometric, remember, it's geometry, it's arrangement in space kind of thing. Same chemical and structural formula except for orientation in space. Now when you look at the formulas, they're both C4H8, both of them. But one's called trans 2-butane and the other one's called cis 2-butane. Trans means across, and if you look at this one on the left, this is forming like a chair. And each side, these carbons that are double bonded in the middle, they don't spin. And so these are locked in position. So there's a methyl on the left, and there's a methyl on the right. There's a hydrogen on the left, there's a hydrogen on the right, but they're oriented across from each other. And you look at the one on the right-hand side, the carbons are double bonded, and they're locked in place too. Each side has a methyl and a hydrogen, but the methyls are on the same side. They shape like a bowl on this picture, the bowl shape. So these are geometric, same chemical and structural, except for the orientation. They both have C4H8. They both have a methyl and a hydrogen on both sides, but the methyl and hydrogens on both sides are not arranged the same. The trans, they're across from each other at an angle there, and the cis is like a bowl shape. They're on the same side. So those are examples of geometric isomers. And you can see the models down below, how they're shaped just a little bit differently there, cis versus trans. Optical isomers. Optical isomers are mirror images of each other. And these, you see, they also call them enantiomers. So optical isomers are also called enantiomers. They're mirror images, and it says same chemical and structural formula, but the arrangement of atoms in space are such that the molecules are mirror images of each other. So you can't superimpose them. So you see that if I had put a line down the middle like a mirror, these two structural formulas would be reflections of each other. But they can't be superimposed because you remember I told you these have a three-dimensional shape in space. And when you look at the models down at the bottom, the little model kit models, you see one's called the L and one's called the D, levos and dextrose, left hand and right hand versions of this molecule. And you can't superimpose those. no matter how you lay it, they cannot be superimposed on each other. Just like if your hand was put in front of a mirror, it would show like a left and a right, and they cannot be superimposed because they're opposites. They're mirror images of each other. So optical isomers or enantiomers are mirror images of each other, same chemical and structural formula, but the arrangement of atoms are such that the molecules are mirror images of each other.